The most famous Swede alive built a career on announcing exactly how good he is. His country spent 200 years doing the opposite, so quiet about its military that half of Europe forgot it had one. That silence ended with a number: 154 main battle tanks aimed in one direction, and Stockholm isn't pretending otherwise anymore. Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson called the rearmament unprecedented outside the darkest days of the Cold War. When a Swede stops being modest, you should probably check what he's looking at. He's looking east. This is the story of how the quietest country in Europe decided to double its army, rebuild a tank Germany wishes it had designed, and turn an island in the Baltic into Vladimir Putin's least favorite piece of real estate. For most of living memory, Sweden's brand was furniture you assemble yourself and a foreign policy you could describe as, "Please leave us out of this." Neutral through 2 world wars, neutral through the entire Cold War, at least on paper. Then Russian armor rolled into Ukraine, and a nation that hadn't fought a war since Napoleon was in fashion looked at the map and did the math. Sweden sits directly across the Baltic from Kaliningrad, Russia's most militarized exclave. Its coastline stretches longer than the distance from New York to Miami, and in 2021, its standing army could fit inside a mid-sized college football stadium with seats to spare. So Sweden joined NATO in 2024, ending 2 centuries of non-alignment in a single signature. Membership was the headline. What came after is the real story, because Stockholm didn't join the alliance to hide behind it. It joined to become the weapon NATO points at the Baltic. The government committed over 170 billion kroner in new military funding through 2030. Defense spending, sitting near 2.6% of GDP in 2026, is on a path toward figures Sweden hasn't seen since the 1950s. Kristersson announced the plan one day before flying to Paris for talks on Ukraine, which tells you exactly which war was on his mind. Now the machine at the center of it, the Stridsvagn 122 looks like a Leopard 2 the same way a bank vault looks like a filing cabinet. When Sweden licensed the Leopard 2 in the 1990s, its engineers refused to take the German version as delivered. Imagine that, a Swede insisting on modifying the furniture before it leaves the store. Reinforced roof armor went on first, built to shrug off artillery airburst. Extra modular protection thickened the turret front and hull until the silhouette barely resembled the donor vehicle, and a digital battlefield management system, cutting edge for its era, wired every tank into a shared combat picture. Defense analysts rated the result the best protected Leopard 2 variant of its generation. And when Sweden ran its own brutal tank trials in the 1990s, the improved Leopard configuration it demanded beat the American Abrams and the French Leclerc for the contract. Berlin designed the Cat. Stockholm taught it to survive. Then 2026 changed the picture. Sweden is upgrading 110 of these tanks to the Stridsvagn 123A standard and buying 44 brand new 123Bs, a configuration roughly equivalent to Germany's newest Leopard 2A8. The upgrade brings a longer L-55 main gun, thicker protection, and NATO-integrated command systems with night optics that turn a Nordic winter into a shooting gallery. Total force when the deliveries finish: 154 tanks backed by a 1.9 billion euro package that also modernizes the vehicles we're about to meet. 154 sounds small next to Russia's paper numbers, but Russia's paper numbers have spent 4 years becoming actual paper. Burned out hulls scattered across Ukraine, many of them killed by systems Sweden helped supply. Quality with a plan beats quantity with a graveyard. The tank is the Fist. The CV-90 is the reason the Fist arrives anywhere. Sweden designed this infantry fighting vehicle in the 1980s for one specific nightmare: Soviet mechanized columns pushing through subarctic forest. Everything about it reflects that birthplace, from a heat signature low enough to hide among frozen pines to a 40mm auto cannon that chews through light armor and helicopters alike, all riding on tracks tuned for snow that swallows lesser vehicles whole. Then Ukraine happened, and the CV-90 stopped being a theory. Swedish donated CV-90-40s went into combat with Ukrainian mechanized units, and crews began reporting something remarkable. The vehicle was keeping them alive through hits that should have been funerals. Ukrainian soldiers took to calling it one of the best vehicles on the front. Sales followed. Denmark partnered on procurement, Ukraine signed on for joint production of new hulls, and the order books at BAE Hägglunds in Örnsköldsvik filled up like a Systembolaget queue on a Friday afternoon. A quiet loop has formed. Sweden donates vehicles to Ukraine. Ukraine feeds back combat data no NATO exercise could ever generate. That data flows into the upgrade programs for Sweden's own fleet. Stockholm is effectively beta testing its army through someone else's war. Brutal to say out loud, but every defense ministry in Europe is thinking it, and only some of them have the industrial base to act on it. Hardware without formations is a museum, so Sweden is doubling its combat power. From 2 mechanized brigades to 4. One new brigade forms at Skövde in the south. The other rises at Boden, up in Norrbotten, where winter temperatures make Moscow feel tropical, and the sun clocks out in November like it has somewhere better to be. That northern brigade carries the designation subarctic mechanized, a formal military term for soldiers who consider -30 a normal commute. Both formations are slated to be operational by 2028. Feeding them requires people, and this is where Sweden reached back into its own history. Conscription returned in 2018 for men and women equally, and the intake is climbing toward 10,000 recruits per year by the end of 2026. The armed forces as a whole are projected to grow from roughly 88,000 personnel toward 130,000 by 2035. For a country of 10.5 million, that's a bigger share of the population under arms than most NATO members can claim. And yes, conscription in Sweden is selective. The military only takes the top scorers from each year's assessment. It's the only lottery on Earth where winning means someone hands you a rifle and a shovel and points at a snowdrift. The armed forces want more women in uniform, and the campaign has been serious. School visits, recruitment fairs, targeted messaging. The results have a twist that surprised the planners. Women currently make up about 16% of new conscripts, and Sweden's own conscription and assessment agency identified the main bottleneck: muscle strength requirements. The standards are identical for everyone. Same tests, same thresholds, no adjusted scoring. Combat roles demand upper body strength levels that, according to decades of sports science, sit far above the female average through no fault of effort or attitude. The practical effect showed up in the data. Female candidates who miss the combat thresholds get steered towards staff, logistics, and support positions, a much smaller pool of slots. So instead of competing against the whole intake, many women end up competing mostly against each other for a limited number of places. The agency wrote it up in almost exactly those words. Researchers at Karolinska Institutet studied female recruits through basic training and documented the physical cost. High rates of musculoskeletal injury, driven partly by pack loads calibrated decades ago for the average male body. The Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences is now building pre-service training programs to close the gap before day one, keeping the standards fixed while raising the candidates toward them. Very Swedish solution. Don't lower the bar, redesign the approach to it, then write a report about the report. Sweden never planned to defend itself with the military alone. The doctrine is called total defense, and it drafts the entire society. Under this framework, civilian agencies train alongside the armed forces. Grocery chains hold wartime stockpile obligations. The government mailed a booklet titled "If Crisis or War Comes" to every household in the country. Millions of copies of survival instructions, delivered to a population whose previous emergency experience was IKEA running out of meatballs. The updated edition tells citizens how to recognize disinformation, store water, and resist occupation. Resist occupation in a pamphlet next to the recycling schedule. The civil defense side of the new resolution gets 37.5 billion kroner of its own through 2030. Bunker networks from the Cold War are being inspected and reactivated. Sweden maintains shelter space for a larger share of its population than almost any country on Earth, a leftover from the era when Stockholm quietly assumed the Soviets might drop by uninvited. The assumption is back. The bunkers never left. For an invader, the practical meaning is grim. There is no version of attacking Sweden where you fight only soldiers. You fight a road network designed to convert into runways, a merchant fleet with mobilization orders, and 10 million people who have literally been mailed the manual. The country made preparedness a household chore, and Swedes are alarmingly good at chores. Pull up a map of the Baltic and find Gotland. It sits in the middle of the sea like a cork in a bottle. Whoever holds it controls air and missile coverage over the sea lanes to Kaliningrad, the Baltic states, and the Finnish coast. Sweden knows this. In one of the most Swedish decisions ever recorded, the government demilitarized Gotland completely in 2005, presumably after a consensus meeting where everyone agreed Russia seemed nice now. The last tanks left the island. For a decade, its heaviest defense asset was a part-time home guard unit. That experiment is over. Gotland has been permanently remilitarized. A dedicated battle group, air defense batteries, and its own allocation of upgraded armor under the new tank program. Russian state media complains about the island's fortification with the regularity of a Volvo service schedule, which is the most reliable sign Stockholm is doing something right. When the Kremlin calls your island provocative, the island is working. Sweden votes this September, and the campaign is loud by Swedish standards, meaning people occasionally raise their voices indoors. Immigration dominates the debate, coalition math keeps pundits employed, and parties that agree on almost nothing spend the evening news proving it, except on defense. The rearmament plan passed with support stretching across the political spectrum, and no serious party is campaigning to shrink the army. In a country where reaching consensus normally requires 3 committees and a fika break, the military budget sails through like it's exempt from being Swedish. Even the immigration argument loops back to the barracks. A growing force needs recruits, and every side has its own theory about where they come from. The one policy Stockholm's politicians won't gamble with is the one Moscow watches closest. Sweden's support to Ukraine now spans more than 45 distinct military systems and capabilities, backed by a 75 billion kroner framework running through 2026. The packages run from CV-9s and Stridsvagn 122s to Archer artillery. A system so automated its crew barely leaves the cab, which suits a nation that avoids unnecessary conversation even under fire. Plus combat boat 90s, air defense, and the ASC-890 surveillance aircraft, a flying radar that hands Ukraine a picture of Russian air activity Moscow spent decades assuming nobody would ever share. The aid itself is changing shape. Stockholm is moving from donating stock to funding production. Swedish money building weapons inside Ukraine's own industry. Old stock donations run out, production lines compound. It's the difference between giving a man a fish and building him a fish factory next door to the guy who keeps stealing his fish. Step back and every piece points the same direction. From the rebuilt tank fleet to the fortress island parked on Russia's Baltic supply lines like a permanent bad mood, none of it was designed for anywhere except the map's eastern edge. Sweden is not building an army for parade ground politics. It is building one for mechanized war, air defense, and rapid reinforcement in the north. And it is building it with the calm of a nation that already knows who the customer is. 200 years of silence, and the first thing Sweden says out loud is measured in brigades. Zlatan told the world he was the best and dared anyone to disagree. His country skipped the announcement and just built the proof. Moscow noticed. That was the point. If this breakdown earned 13 minutes of your day, the subscribe button costs you 1 second. And unlike Swedish furniture, it comes fully assembled. Hit it, and we'll see you at the front line of the next story.